Wooing in Wyoming. There's a story behind this story that I thought I'd share before starting the actual book. First, the main character is named after a faithful reader and good friend. I let her choose the type of chocolate to be named after her, which you'll see. Erin's backstory is sad because she lost her fiancé to a terrible accident. There's a story behind his accident that you need to hear. I often have luncheons when I travel so that I can meet readers from different parts of the country. I was at a luncheon with several other authors and many readers. At this event, in Texas, I sat with several longtime readers, and one of the readers' sons. The son kept telling me that fortune cookies were not from China, and they deceived the American public with fortune cookies. It had nothing to do with what the rest of us were talking about. After about 10 minutes, I told him if he didn't stop, I'd kill him in a book. He loved the idea so much that he is the fiancé who died. You'll read about him in this story. Yes, it was his real name, but SHHHH. Don't tell the literary police that I was naughty and used a real name. I really hope you enjoy Erin's story. Chapter 1. Erin Krol paced back and forth in the back of the church, waiting for her wedding to start. Everyone she loved surrounded her, but she got no comfort from them. Her parents were both there, watching her with amused expressions. Her big sister Megan was there, patting her slight baby bump. Even her new brother-in-law Bob was there. And Jean had flown all the way from Atlanta for her wedding. They all understood her mental dilemma though. She had planned to marry in this same church, not quite 3 years ago. She'd stood in this same spot, pacing in her wedding gown, not the same one. Wearing a wedding dress she'd purchased to marry another man would have felt like a betrayal of the only man she'd ever loved. Instead of someone sticking their head into the room to tell her it was time, the pastor had come in and taken her hand, gesturing to a chair. Randall had died on his way to the wedding. Her heart broke into a million tiny pieces, and she knew she'd never marry again. Now, here she stood, about to marry another man. But she hadn't fallen in love, she was about to marry an absolute stranger whose name she didn't even know. The door opened, and she felt fear wash over her. She may not love her new husband-to-be, but she didn't want him to die just because he was marrying her. A purple-haired bundle of energy rushed into the room, taking Erin's hands in hers. "He's here. Do you have any questions for me?" Erin nodded. "I need to know his name, age, occupation, social security number." "Can you think of anything else, Dad?" John Krol got to his feet with a smile and walked over. "You must be Dr. Lachele. Erin's told me a lot about you." "Lies." "Every word of it." Dr. Lachele cackled loudly at her own joke. "Sorry." "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Krol." Erin stared at Dr. Lachele with a bemused expression. "I'm marrying him in 15 minutes. Surely you can give me some details now." "I'll give you one hint." "Will that help you?" Erin nodded, a bit warily. She trusted Dr. Lachele to find her the perfect man to marry, but she didn't trust the crazy woman to give her any kind of real information. "Sure. You're not marrying me." Dr. Lachele laughed again. "Going to check on your groom." Erin watched her go, shaking her head. She looked at Jean. "Are you sure you want to put yourself through this?" Jean nodded. "I'm honestly not sure how I'll marry any other way." She sighed. "I'm so busy working all the time, and there aren't exactly men lining my sidewalk begging for my hand. I'm ready to settle down and have kids. Maybe you should wait to see how my marriage turns out before you even bother. What if she just thinks she's a matchmaker, and she hooks me up with a drug dealer who also runs guns as a side business?" "Huh?" Erin turned to her father and rested her head on his shoulder. "Please don't make me marry a drug dealer, Daddy." Dad patted her back gently. "I promise, if he's a drug dealer, you don't have to marry him. Your mother doesn't need grandchildren that badly." Megan sighed heavily. "Hello. Pregnant daughter here. Erin glared at her sister. Hello. Having a pre-wedding meltdown here. Megan seemed to consider that for a moment. Very well. Carry on. Asterisk. Al Frank paced the floor in the little room at the back of the church. They'd stuck him back here to wait for his bride, and the wait was getting long. Why had he been told to be at the church at 10 when the wedding didn't start until 11? Didn't they realize time was money? You're going to wear a hole in that carpet. Al spun around to find the purple-haired matchmaker who had gotten him into this predicament. Why couldn't she just help him make babies magically appear? He didn't want to have to deal with some crazy woman to get them. And she'd have to be crazy to marry an absolute stranger. While she was at it, maybe she could provide a nanny for them so he didn't have to marry. That would be good. Please tell me my bride is here. He was ready to get this show on the road. She's in the bride's room, anxious to meet you. Dr. Lachele looked him up and down. You clean up pretty good for a man who was covered in chocolate the last time I met him. Al shrugged, smoothing the front of his black suit. Did you tell her to bring her passport and warm clothes for the honeymoon? Yes, I told her. You are spending one night here in town, right? She asked, frowning at him. I told you it would be easier that way. We'll spend a night here in Wyoming. We're driving to Cheyenne after the reception. And I'll have her back before January 3rd, but I think that's a strange and random date to have her back by. Dr. Lachele rolled her eyes at him. You'll survive. Time for you to head to the front of the church anyway. Where's your best man? He's out there. His wife and kids are in the front row, so don't get any ideas about matching him up. Dave's quite happy as he is. Dave had been Al's best friend since junior high, and they cared about each other deeply. Dave's kids were part of the reason he wanted some of his own so badly, and his kid sister's twins. Can I get one quick peek at her before we marry? He asked. Absolutely not. Just get to the front of the church and wait. You'll see her when you see her. Dr. Lachele left the room, heading toward a closed door. Al followed and stood trying to see what was behind the door in the other room, but she caught him, making a shooing motion with her hands. Go on. I'm not breaking any of my rules for you. Get out of here. He shrugged. Can't blame a man for trying, can you? Yes, I can. Now go. He had a grin on his face as he took his place at the front of the church, and Dave leaned toward him. What's so funny? Oh, that crazy matchmaker I hired. I swear that woman is going to be the death of me. The one that told you she wanted to lick all of your fingers, because they were covered in chocolate when she interviewed you? Al nodded. I wouldn't want to be her husband. He must feel like he's got a fight on his hands every minute of every day. Good thing she's got someone else in mind for you then, huh? Al looked over at Stacy, Dave's wife, and waved. Dave's 2-year-old daughter waved back. Unca Al. Al didn't care if waving at a child right before your wedding started was good etiquette. He loved little Sasha with all his heart. Hi, Sash. Stacy held little Benjamin Albert on her lap, and she lifted his hand to have him wave as well. His namesake was only 3 months old and not really up to the task on his own yet. Everyone was seated and music began to play. He watched as 2 women in lavender walked down the aisle, one after the other. He couldn't help but wonder if either were related to his future bride. The music changed, and suddenly she was there, floating down the aisle on an older man's arm. He assumed it was her father, but he couldn't be sure. When they got to the front, the man kissed her cheek, and Al's bride hugged him close. I love you, Dad. Love you too, Erin. Her father stroked her cheek and walked away. Erin. My bride's name is Erin. And she's beautiful. He breathed a sigh of relief. He wanted good-looking children after all. To him, her dress was more suited for spring, and he was thankful they'd had some unseasonably warm weather. The dress was strapless, leaving her shoulders completely bare. That was a summer dress, and it was December. When she moved to stand next to him, and took his hand with hers, he felt a jolt go through his system. Wow. Dr. Lachele may be strange, but she did good. Erin peeked up at him through her dark lashes. Tall, dark, and handsome. Exactly what she hadn't been expecting, but definitely what she wanted. He was absolutely adorable, and he smelled like, why did her new husband smell like chocolate? If he smelled like that every day, she'd keep him forever. She paid little attention to the short sermon the pastor gave before he started the vows. She could barely pay attention to the vows. The man beside her was very hot, and he smelled like chocolate. She just couldn't get that fact out of her brain. Why, oh why, does he smell like chocolate? She repeated her vows smoothly, surprised that she'd made it through them. When it was his turn, she looked up into his eyes, and saw they were brown. Chocolate brown. This man, she was going to gain 50 pounds in 3 months married to him. He made her think of chocolate and only chocolate. And kissing. She wanted to kiss him and see if he tasted like chocolate. I now pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss the bride. Erin stepped closer to him. She couldn't remember what the pastor had said his name was. She was married to a man whose name she didn't know. What on earth was wrong with her? Elle saw the panicked look in her eyes, wondering what had caused it to happen suddenly. Was she afraid to kiss him? Don't be afraid, Tootsie Pop. I won't bite. She gave him a startled look, just as his lips brushed against hers. Her hand went to the back of his neck, and she held him in place. He did taste like chocolate. When she broke the kiss, she pulled his head down so she could whisper to him. He was very tall, and she wasn't. Her diminutive stature made her feel like they'd never be able to communicate for a moment. Why do you taste like chocolate? He chuckled softly. I'll explain when we're alone. Wanna go be alone for a minute? She nodded emphatically. I'm Erin, by the way. Elle. Elle? What kind of name is Elle? It's my name. If you don't like it, you'll have to come up with something better to call me. There was nothing wrong with his name. It was better than Maynard or Eugene. She'd have to live with it. Come on. I hid a gift for you in the room they hid me away in at the back of the church. He caught her hand in his and tugged her down the aisle, ignoring the people trying to talk to them. His long strides ate up the distance until he felt a hard tug on his arm. Erin dug in her heels and stopped walking. You're going too fast. I have tiny little short people legs, and I'm wearing a floor-length gown. You're going to end up flying me around like Piglet on a blustery day if you're not careful. Al stopped and looked down at the feisty little woman beside him. Sorry. I didn't realize I was going too fast. Your legs are at least half again as long as mine. Just be careful. You're a bossy little thing, aren't you? He wasn't sure if that was good or bad. He'd figure it out eventually. Walking toward the back room again, he was careful not to walk too quickly. I'm a high school teacher. Sometimes I need to let my boss flag fly. That explains a lot. What do you teach? Public speaking. He shuddered. Do you actually like to give speeches? I love to, but I understand there are people who don't. Do you realize that more Americans are afraid of public speaking than deaf? I think that's a bit overboard, but I guess I'm just not most people. She followed him into the room and was a tiny bit alarmed when he closed the door behind them. Do we need the door closed? He raised an eyebrow at her. We're married. It's okay if we're alone with the door closed. She shook her head, laughing at herself softly. I never dreamed I'd be married this way. She wanted the door open in case he was a dangerous man, but she was married to him. She needed to learn to trust him. He shrugged. I never dreamed I'd be married at all, but I've discovered I want children. Erin nodded. Me too. And looking at you, all I can think about is how those children will be made. Do you want your wedding present? I didn't get you anything. She hadn't expected him to have a gift for her. Now she felt bad. That's okay, I made you something. He walked to the counter and picked up a small white box off of it. It had a big red ribbon tied around it. Here you go. It was a few days before Christmas, and while an odd time for a wedding, she thought it would be best if she waited to marry until the Christmas break. Carefully untying the ribbon, she lifted the top off the box. You made me chocolate? Are you perfect? With as stressed as she was feeling about the wedding, it was exactly what she was needing. He laughed. Far from it. I was just trying to fly you like Piglet on a blustery day, if you'll recall. But you made me chocolate. He nodded. I wasn't sure what kind you like, so I made a mix of milk chocolate with caramel and dark chocolate with caramel. I hope you like those. We'll find out. Erin chose a piece at random and popped it into her mouth, doing her best not to moan at the creamy deliciousness. You can make me chocolates anytime you want. He chuckled. That's a good thing, because I'm a candy maker. I'm the owner of Frank's Fudge downtown. He was thrilled to see her enjoy the chocolates so much. He loved to make them, but without someone to get so excited about eating them, it wouldn't be half the fun. Oh. One of my students got me a box of your chocolate for Christmas. I love Frank's Fudge. She frowned at him. But your name is Al. My name is L. Frank. I thought Frank's Fudge had a better ring to it than A.L.'s Fudge. Erin nodded. It does. You're a candy man. The tune of the old song ran through her head. That's what I'm going to call you. The Candy Man. And now you know why I smell like chocolate. I always smell like chocolate. He shrugged. This isn't a bad thing. Erin couldn't believe she had a man who smelled like chocolate and not like mansweat or cologne. She'd definitely won the lottery with him. I heartily approve. Does that mean I can kiss you again? Erin swallowed hard. Yeah, I guess. You mean now? Until 15 minutes before, she hadn't kissed a man since before Randall died. He nodded, slowly walking toward her. I want to see if I like it as much as I think I do. That first kiss, even with the whole world watching them, had been nothing short of miraculous. You don't know? You just kissed me in front of a couple hundred people. Well, now I want to do it with no one watching. I need to see if you are as sweet in my arms as I remember. Erin nodded emphatically. And I need to see if you still taste like chocolate. I can't believe I married a man who tastes like chocolate. He chuckled as his hands went to her waist. I'll make sure I smear chocolate on myself every day before I head home from work. See that you do. She felt terribly bold as she reached up and pulled him down for another kiss. The height disparity was alarming, but the taste of milk chocolate assailed her senses, and she forgot everything else. She couldn't believe it. She'd married the Candy Man. Chapter 2. The reception was held right there, in the fellowship hall of the church. Erin felt very self-conscious as she introduced Al to all the people who were important to her. These are my parents, she said, stopping in front of an older couple. It's very nice to meet you, her mother said with a smile. Welcome to the family. Her dad was a bit warier, studying him carefully. Where are you going on your honeymoon? He asked. I was told she needed her passport, and if you're taking my baby out of the country, I have a right to know where. Switzerland, Al replied. I'm taking her to stay in a little cabin in the mountains of Switzerland. And where do you live? I know you have to be close, because Erin refused to relocate. Right here in Laramie. I'm the owner of Frank's Fudge. Her father had a blank look on his face, but her mother looked excited. I love Frank's Fudge. There's a family discount, right? Al laughed. There sure is. Come by any time you need a chocolate fix. Her mom frowned. But you're going to be out of the country. What will I do until you get back? He shook his head. I'll write you a note from my manager. He'll fix you right up. I'll need that before you leave. A woman beside her mother smiled. Mom, make sure you pick some up for me. The baby needs extra chocolate in her life. Al eyed her curiously. She didn't really look pregnant to him. I'm Al. She smiled. I'm Megan, Erin's big sister. She pulled a man with dark hair and eyes forward. This is Bob. Al held his hand out to Bob. It's nice to meet you, Bob. I take it you two are a couple? Bob nodded. We got married a couple of months back. There's already a baby on the way. Megan grinned. Bob makes the best burgers in all of Wyoming. You need to come down to Culpeper some weekend and try them. Bob's Burger Barn. She paused for a moment, sneaking a glance at her sister. I'd love it if you'd bring some fudge with you when you come. Erin grinned. I have a feeling my mom and sister are going to spend all their time hitting you up for chocolate. It's a good thing you like making it, right? She nudged her sister. He made me chocolate as a wedding gift. I hate you right now. Erin laughed, making a face. You're just sad that you married the burger man, and I married the candy man. Definitely. Hey, Bob said. Aren't you supposed to love me? I do love you, but I'm pregnant and baby needs chocolate. That was the only reason those evil words slipped past my lips. Al shook his head, wondering just what he'd married into. He felt a tugging at his sleeve and turned to find his niece, Christy, standing in front of him. He picked her up. This is my niece, Christy. She has a twin running around here somewhere. They're not identical, but they look a lot alike. Just then a little girl moved in front of Erin. Your dress is beautiful. You're my new aunt. Mama told me. Erin smiled down at the little girl, picking her up into her arms. And what's your name? Tristy. Erin grinned. Christy and Tristy? Tristy nodded. Mama said it's easier to remember who we are if our names rhyme. Mama sounds like a smart woman. Erin said, utterly infatuated with the little girl already. How old are you? We're 3. She held up 3 fingers, having to use her other hand to hold down the other 2. How old are you? Erin laughed. I'm 26. Mama's 26 too. She is? Where's your mama? I think I need to meet her. Just then, a woman around her age stopped in front of Erin. So sorry. They have been dying to get close to their uncle. He's their favorite person in the world. You'd think I would be after 8.5 months of pregnancy with both of them kicking my bladder, but no, it's him. She smiled. I'm Misty, by the way. Misty Jackson. I'm Al's kid sister. Erin smiled. So nice to meet you and your girls. And I won't have to worry about names, because I can just say Isty, and all of you will come running. Misty laughed. We will at that. I thought I was so cute and clever when I named them names that rhymed with mine, but I spend all my time confused now. She leaned closer to Erin. I did before anyway, but now I have an excuse. And it's a good one. Erin said. She looked around for a man that might belong to the woman before her. She wanted to ask, but she didn't want to be rude. My husband is overseas. Al fills in as the man in their lives as much as possible. Misty looked at her brother with hero worship in her eyes. Does he always smell like chocolate? Erin asked, trying to keep her voice down. Misty nodded emphatically. It's his best quality. I kind of like it already. She lowered her voice even more, so that only Misty would hear her. He tastes like chocolate too. Misty laughed. Not something I need to know about my brother, but I'm sure you'll love that. I will. Erin spotted Jean coming toward them, trailing Dr. Lachele. This is my dearest friend from college, Jean. Jean, this is Al and his sister Misty. I'm holding Tristy, and Al is holding Christy. Their names rhyme. Jean was one of the few people who knew that Erin had always loved rhyming names. She didn't even know why they made her so happy, but they did. Jean laughed. I guess Dr. Lachele found you a good family then, didn't she? Al is a chocolate maker. Definitely a match made in heaven then. It's nice to meet you, Al. Jean took Erin's arm and pulled her away from her new husband. I'm going to do it. Looks like Dr. Lachele did a good job for you. Erin nodded. So far so good, but I've known him for just an hour. You never can tell what will happen from here. My only complaint is he's too tall. Jean peeked around Erin to look at him. Yeah, he really makes you look tiny. And feminine. You look really feminine beside him. I'll keep that in mind. Maybe it'll make me feel better. Through the rest of the reception, she had fun, talking to everyone she knew and many she didn't. A lot of the other teachers from her school were there, and they all enjoyed meeting Al. Her friend, Angela, an English teacher, laughed. Wait, you're Frank's fudge? Erin has been bragging about how one of her students got her a box of your best chocolate for Christmas. And she wouldn't share any. Erin shrugged, not denying a thing. Show me a woman who shares chocolate, and I'll show you an idiot. After the cake was cut, Al asked if she was ready to leave. She looked around her, feeling uncomfortable at the idea. She barely knew him after all, but she couldn't keep putting him off. Sure. My suitcases are in my dad's car. We'll have to get them from him. She said a tearful goodbye to her friend Jean, who would be heading back to Atlanta after her interview with Lachele the next day. I'm going to miss you. Jean nodded, swiping at a tear. We have Skype. Just don't forget me while you're busy being married. Erin laughed. Like I could forget the girl who short-sheeted my bed the first week of school, because she didn't like how early I got up for classes. You got me back with shampoo on my toothbrush. We're even. Love you bunches. I'll be there for your wedding, whenever it happens. I know you will. Erin had tears streaming as she and Al followed her dad out to his car. As soon as they stepped outside, Al became alarmed. Where's your coat? She shrugged. Nothing matched the dress. I'll be all right. We're inside mostly. Al immediately stripped off his coat, holding it for her to slip her arms into the sleeves. Her father watched, nodding with approval. I trust you with her if you're already worried about her being cold. Al didn't say anything. He was glad her father trusted him, but didn't see that it mattered a great deal. He was the one who'd married her and would be leaving the country with her the next day, either way. After the suitcases were transferred, Al shook hands with her father, and then Erin slipped into her dad's arms. Thank you for not going all crazy dad on him. John Krol grinned. As if I'd do that. Erin rolled her eyes. I'll call you as soon as I get home. Have a good time. I know Switzerland is a country you've always wanted to see. She got into a smaller-sized SUV and buckled her seatbelt. Where are we off to today? I booked a room at a mansion in Cheyenne that has been turned into a Band B. I figured it would be a nice place to stay until we fly out tomorrow morning. What time are our flights tomorrow? And how did you book airfare without knowing my name? I had Dr. Lachele book yours. She's such a stickler for information. She wouldn't even tell me your first name. Your sister seemed nice. She obviously thinks a lot of you. I think a lot of her too. Our parents were killed when she was 16, and she lived with me after that. She stayed with me through college and until she married. I didn't open Frank's fudge until she was out of the house. Really? What made you interested in making fudge for a living? Not that I'm complaining. I've got a man who smells like chocolate all the time. Who could complain about that? He smiled. I'm glad you're obsessed with chocolate. It'll make you much easier to keep happy. Oh yeah. Show me a woman who isn't obsessed with chocolate and I'll show you a woman with broken taste buds. So a speech teacher, huh? What made you decide to do that? She shrugged. You know, I thought about being an English teacher, but I realized I'd rather give a speech than write an essay. So I changed my major. I love teaching the kids all about listening correctly and giving simple speeches. My favorite unit is oral interpretation of literature, and I spend more time on that than I probably should. Do you usually have students who enjoy speech? Or are they forced to take the class? My students take it as an elective. There's no requirement for speech in public schools, so they take it because they think it'll be fun. Or because they want to get a head start on college. Rarely do parents force their kids into public speaking. He got onto the highway, heading for Cheyenne. As they drove and talked, he couldn't help but wonder if she was as attracted to him as he was to her. He hoped she wasn't planning to wait to consummate the marriage until they got to know one another better, though Dr. Lachele had warned him many women who were married as they were did that. He could understand that it was harder for a woman to give herself to the man she'd just met than it was for a man to just take what he wanted. The mindset was different. When they were halfway to Cheyenne, he realized he was hungry. Do you want to eat? I'm wearing a wedding dress. I think I might feel a little conspicuous. Erin was hungry too, but she wasn't about to eat somewhere in a wedding dress. You could change in the restroom. She shook her head. I think it's smarter if we wait until we get there. Why don't you run into a gas station for some snacks? He frowned. I can do that. Do you want something? She looked down at her dress. Maybe some plain potato chips? I'm really hungry, but I don't want to get anything on this dress either. I hope that someday my daughter will wear it. So you do want kids? Absolutely. I'm assuming that's part of the reason Dr. Lachele hooked us up together. We both want children. At least she hoped he wanted them too. Dr. Lachele wouldn't mess up that badly, though. Yes, I want kids. I'd like at least 2 or 3. Me too. I think my dad would like a grandson, since he only had daughters. She frowned. I'm not saying that right. Mom already had Megan when they met. Dad married her knowing that he'd have one daughter, and then they had me. Dad thinks of Megan as his own, though. I just don't want to leave you with the wrong impression. You and Megan don't look much alike. She shook her head. I take after Dad, and Megan looks more like Mom. I can see that. You're both very pretty, of course, but you're much prettier. Erin wasn't used to people thinking she was prettier than her sister. She felt like she'd been living in Megan's shadow her entire life. You're probably the only person in the world to think that. He shrugged. I can't help it if every other man in the world is blind. You know what? I think I like you. Can I keep you? Not only do you smell like chocolate, but you think I'm pretty. I can deal with that. He pulled off at a gas station. I'm going to run in and get something to snack on. You want chips? Water? Yes, please. She'd never been much of a soda drinker. An occasional cream soda made her very happy, but they were a treat instead of a way of life. While she waited, another car stopped beside them, making her very aware of the dress she was wearing. If she'd thought about it, she'd have changed at the church. Instead, she was taking a road trip in a wedding dress. Who took road trips in wedding dresses? When he got back to the car, he divvied up the food he'd gotten. What, no chocolate? He wrinkled his nose. Why would I eat inferior chocolate? Mine's the best in the state, and we both know it. She grinned. Not lacking confidence, are you? Not where my chocolate is concerned. I've worked hard to make it the best there is. He took a few bites of the chips he'd gotten himself. Okay, I'm going to get us there. I hope you can change out of that fast, because I'm going to be starving by the time we hit Cheyenne. I'll do my best, she promised. Chapter 3. Once they were at the Band B, they checked in, and Al carried their things up to the room they were given for the night. Erin immediately dug into her smaller suitcase and chose a pair of warm-ups and a t-shirt. I hope you don't mind not dressing up tonight, but after being in a wedding gown all day, I'm ready to be comfortable. That's fine. We'll go somewhere casual. Erin slipped into the bathroom to change, and once she was there, realized she couldn't do it on her own. She felt very silly as she opened the door for help. My dress is holding me prisoner. Would you mind? She turned her back to him, feeling him step up close behind her. Al carefully grasped the zipper and tugged it down, unzipping the gown all the way to her waist. If I didn't say it before, I'll say it now. You were absolutely ravishing today. He leaned down and kissed her neck in the exact spot it met her shoulder. Erin felt a shiver run through her. Thank you, she said, holding the dress up in the front with both hands. I'll be right back. Back in the bathroom, she sank against the door, breathing deeply. There was something about her new husband that made her feel as if her entire body was on fire. She quickly changed into the fresh clothes, walking out into the main room and grabbing a scrunchie to hold her hair back. Are you going to change? She asked, carefully keeping her voice steady. I already did, he said with a laugh. She hadn't been able to look at him since she'd left the bathroom, so she hadn't even realized. Sorry. She turned to him, noting he was dressed very similarly to her. No need to be sorry. What are you hungry for? He walked closer to her, taking her hand in his. Now that she was out of her wedding dress, she seemed so much more touchable to him. He knew it was probably a strange way to think about it, but she'd almost seemed lofty in her beautiful dress. Now, she was just another chocolate-loving woman. He could deal with that. I have no idea. I'm so hungry, I would eat just about anything. He frowned. I know there's not a restaurant here. They serve breakfast, but that's all. Do you want to get in the car and see what we see? Try to walk somewhere? She shrugged. I'm beyond caring. You decide, and I'll follow meekly behind you. It's probably the only time in our marriage I'll do anything meekly, so don't get used to it. He laughed. I didn't want to marry so I could have someone to boss around. I promise. He grabbed his wallet and keys from the dresser. Let's drive. I didn't see anything really close, and I don't want you to starve to death while we wander around aimlessly. That would be best, she said. I'm really hungry. Do you get hangry? More often than I care to admit. You should keep chocolate on you at all times to keep me happy. He shook his head, heading down to the front desk. Do you have a list of restaurants that are close? The woman behind the counter pushed a typed sheet of paper across the counter. Thank you. Once they were in the car, he offered her the list. Are you sure you don't want to choose? I'm positive. I don't care at all. Whatever is good with me. When she got as hungry as she was, Erin didn't care at all about what she ate as long as there was something going into her tummy. How about steak? Sounds wonderful. He punched the address into the car's GPS system. It says we're 5 minutes away. Drive fast. 10 minutes later, they were seated in a booth at a steakhouse she'd never heard of. Bread was placed on the table immediately, and she was very thankful, reaching for a piece and slathering butter on it. She finished her second piece before asking him if he wanted some. Al grinned, loving that she was so distracted by food that she'd forgotten about him. He'd dated girls who refused to eat in front of men, so he was happy to be married to a woman who wasn't afraid to show her hunger. "I'd love some if you're not going to eat it all." She wrinkled her nose at him, cutting him off a thin slice of the bread and putting just a dab of butter on it. If he was going to be sarcastic, then he didn't deserve more. "I won't eat that portion," she said, handing it to him. He laughed softly. "You're a mess, Erin Frank. What if I don't want to change my name? I've been Erin Krol for a whole lot of years." She'd planned to change her last name to White when she married Randall, but she'd been in love with him. She barely knew Al. He shrugged. "Then don't change it. I want the kids to have my name, but if you want to keep your name, it doesn't hurt me any." She smiled, nodding. "I'll think about it and let you know then." She hadn't really thought about it before, assuming she'd take his name. But when he said her first name with his last name, it didn't quite sound right. She used her name professionally, why should she change it? The waitress stopped by the table, and they placed their orders. When she walked away, he cut off another piece of bread for himself and popped it into his mouth. "Our flight leaves here at noon tomorrow. We have a layover in New York City, and then we fly into Geneva." "Are we staying in Geneva?" She'd never been out of the country, and she was excited at the prospect. He shook his head. "No, I rented a little cabin in the mountains. We'll rent a car there and drive up. I have some sightseeing adventures planned as well." "Sounds good to me. I've never been anywhere outside the country." "You do have a passport, right?" She nodded. "Yeah, I've had it for 3 years." "Why'd you get a passport if you weren't going anywhere?" he asked, frowning. That didn't make any sense to him at all. "I was planning to go to Rome for my honeymoon 3 years ago." Erin said the words softly. He would make of it what he wanted. "You've been married before?" Al hated that idea. She shook her head. "Randall was killed on his way to the church on our wedding day. We never quite made it that far." She was surprised when tears pricked her eyes, and she dashed one away with an angry hand. She thought she was cried out on that subject, but here she was, making a fool of herself on her wedding day. I had no idea. How am I supposed to respond to that?" "I'm sorry." "Thank you. It was rough going for a while, but I'm okay now. I wouldn't have contacted Dr. Lachele if I wasn't." "I don't know where these tears came from, I honestly thought they'd finally dried up." "I'm sorry." "Don't apologize. There's nothing wrong with crying for someone you've loved and lost." His hand covered hers on the table between them. "I'm looking forward to making memories with you." Already he wanted his to be the only man's name on her lips. Their salads were put in front of them then, and she picked up her fork and started to eat. "So tell me something about you that most people don't know." "We're strangers, but we're married, so I need to know the dirt." She had to get off the subject of Randall or she'd lose it, and she didn't want her new husband to think she spent all her time crying for her dead fiancé. Truly, it had been over a year since she'd sat down and wept for him. She was just feeling maudlin today, because of the wedding. He thought about it for a moment. "I graduated from college with a degree in marketing a week before my parents died. I thought I'd end up doing advertising campaigns, but I needed to support my sister. So I started managing the restaurant where I'd been a server while in college. While there, I watched them try to perfect a dessert. I took the recipe home and messed with it and ended up making it a ton better. That's still the recipe I use for my fudge topping. Can I come to work with you someday and just watch you make chocolate? I can't quite put my finger on what's so special about your fudge, but it's the best I've ever eaten. Have you tried the peanut butter fudge? That's my favorite. She frowned. No. Why didn't you bring me peanut butter fudge for my wedding gift? He sighed. I thought about bringing you a mixture, but I just didn't know what you'd like. Now my mom and sister are going to get to try your peanut butter fudge before me. Do you really think they'll go while we're out of the country? Erin laughed. You gave my mother a note, giving her a discount on chocolate. They'll be there every day, and they'll try every single flavor. She shook her head. Who's in charge while we're gone? An old coworker of mine. Name's Dale. We waited tables together, and he was promoted to cook at the same time I was promoted to manager. When I decided to open Frank's Fudge, he agreed to become my manager. We work together most days, but with two of us, we can take time off. We're open Monday through Saturday, and I usually get to take at least a half day off during that time. What half day do you take off? Are we ever going to see each other? He shrugged. I almost always take Sundays off. Sometimes I have to restock inventory on Sundays. I try to take Wednesday mornings for errands. Wow. So I guess I'll see you mostly in the summer. At least we won't get sick of one another too quickly. Would they have to schedule time to make the babies she so desperately wanted? How uncomfortable would that be? I hope we never get sick of each other. Al pushed his salad away and took another drink of his Pepsi. This is my first trip out of the country too. I'm really excited. Do you ski? He shook his head. Nope. I've never really had a lot of time for stuff like that. I love mountain views though. You can get those at home. I'm surprised you didn't go for a beach somewhere. It was winter in Wyoming, and the snow would be up to her but for months, and he chose a mountain vacation. The man had lost his mind. I thought Switzerland would be fun. Don't you? Sure. I don't know that it would have been my first choice, but I'm excited to go. I love the idea of snuggling together under a blanket by a roaring fire. He brought her fingers to his lips. Doesn't that sound like fun? Erin felt a rush of tingles wash through her at the touch of his lips. She hoped he wasn't going to do that in public often. Sure. You're not going to hold out on me, are you? He asked, just as the server slid their plates in front of them. The server looked back and forth between them for a moment, obviously trying to decide if he should keep his mouth shut. In the end, he opted not to. Don't hold out on him. That's just mean. Al nodded, agreeing with the server. It is mean. It's our wedding night. Poor guy. Your wedding night and she's threatening to hold out on you. That's just cruel. The server shook his head and walked away. Erin frowned at Al. Was that really necessary? Now that random guy is going to be thinking about our sex life all night. It's none of his business. Trust me, he's got more important things on his mind. He probably just figured that if he agreed with me, I'd tip more. Well, I'd still appreciate if you didn't do anything like that again. It's embarrassing. Al raised one eyebrow. You really don't think that all the people at our wedding, knowing we were meeting at the altar, were wondering whether we'd do each other tonight? That's all I could think of. She rolled her eyes. You have a vested interest, and none of the others do. I sure hope no one was thinking about that. They should have been admiring my dress or thinking about how cute my bridesmaids looked. Your friend I met at the reception, she was a bridesmaid. Where did you say she's from? Atlanta. We were roommates in college. She found a job in Georgia after graduation, and she moved there. I've only seen her a few times in the past 4 years. She couldn't begin to express how much she missed Jean. After their first very rough week living together, they'd become best friends. If she could move Jean back to Wyoming, she'd do it in a heartbeat. I lived at home while I went to college. It turned out to be a good thing, Because it wasn't as much of a transition for Misty when our parents died. What happened to them? She couldn't imagine losing one parent, let alone both at the same time. She loved her mom, but deep down, she was very much a daddy's girl. They were hit by a car while walking. They had the right of way, but the teenage driver dropped her cell phone and was driving on the wrong side of the street, completely hanging over onto the passenger side floorboard trying to find it. She was mortified, and I think she punished herself more than anyone else ever could. I can't imagine. Erin shook her head. Imagine living in that girl's brain and knowing that she had killed 2 people for the rest of her life. I'm sorry for your loss. He smiled slightly. Don't those words feel empty when you say them? I know you've heard them a million times just as I have. It doesn't bring back the people we love. No, it doesn't. But I don't know of another way to offer comfort. Al shrugged. There probably isn't a better way. Just an observation. Chapter 4. By the time they got back to their room, Erin was absolutely exhausted. Do you realize I had to be up before 6 to get ready for the wedding? My hairdresser had to start working at 7 to get me ready. I've never spent so much time primping for an event in my entire life. Al looked at her skeptically. Not even when you were getting ready for your other wedding? She shook her head. My hair was shorter then, easier to do. It felt so strange to be there alone with a man other than Randall, getting ready for her wedding night. I'm going to go change. He nodded, glad she hadn't asked him to wait to consummate the marriage. He thought it wouldn't be a big deal, but now that he'd met her, he realized it was a big deal. He didn't want to wait. Dr. Lachele had done her homework. Something about this girl touched him, and not in the physical sense that he wanted to be touched. It was something deeper, more profound. He felt protective of her after only a few hours' acquaintance. How had that happened? Erin shut the door behind her and looked down at the simple short piece of nothing she'd bought for the night. How on earth was she going to wear that in front of Al? He was still mostly a stranger. She took a deep breath and stripped out of her comfortable clothes and pulled the satin and lace garment over her head. Brushing her teeth, she looked at herself, assessing. Hopefully Al wouldn't laugh when she walked out there trying to look all sexy. She felt like a child playing dress-up in her mother's clothes. Of course, she'd never seen her mother wear anything like she was wearing. She shut down that line of thought. She wasn't going there. Opening the door, she left the bathroom and stood self-consciously in the middle of the bedroom, feeling his eyes on her. Bathroom's all yours. Al could see she needed a moment, so he walked past her, running his hand down her arm before disappearing into the bathroom. Erin climbed under the covers, feeling a little less ridiculous once she was completely covered. With Randall, this would have been so natural. With a stranger? Not even a little bit. When Al came out of the bathroom, his eyes were drawn to Erin, who was covered up to her chin. She wasn't feeling good about this, and it was obvious. You okay? She shook her head. Not really. This doesn't feel right. He closed his eyes for a moment. Then we'll wait. We will? Of course we will. I'm not going to force you to do something you don't feel comfortable with. I mean, I'd rather not wait another minute, but if it's not right for you, then it's not right for us. She stared at him for a moment, and sighed with relief. Thank you. Dr. Lachele warned me that a lot of the women she matches feel like they need a little time before the wedding night. She said that the mail-order brides of old did it with their new husbands on the wedding night, and they didn't complain, but modern women are used to having more choices about their bodies. They did it? Were those her exact words? Erin couldn't imagine Dr. Lachele saying, did it. Well, she said the old hide the pickle, but I was trying to be a bit more circumspect. And now look what you did. You dragged it out of me. Al shook his head at her. She was thankful he'd put on a pair of pajama shorts. That sounds more like Dr. Lachele. That woman is something else. She absolutely is. We've gotta love her, though. We do? He nodded. She brought us together, and so far, we haven't killed each other. We've been married for like 11 hours or something. That's almost forever, isn't it? Erin was glad he could make her smile. That was something to build on. And he makes chocolate for a living. I can't ever forget that. Al slipped into bed beside her, reaching over to turn off the light. So am I allowed to kiss you and stuff? Depends on what and stuff entails. Maybe is the only answer you're getting at the moment. Erin turned toward him on the bed, propping her head up on one fist. He put his hand on her shoulder and slowly stroked it down her arm. And stuff is light touching. I won't grope anything covered by your… What is that thing you're wearing anyway? She shrugged. Does it matter what it's called? Al shook his head. I guess not. I like it, whatever it's called. I'm glad. Erin watched him as he scooched a little closer to her, his hand cupping her cheek. He leaned forward, watching her for skittishness. They'd already kissed a couple of times, but never when they were mostly naked and lying in a bed together. He was fully aware that the bed made everything so much more real. As his lips brushed against hers, he felt hers soften beneath his, her hand moving to his shoulder to cling to him. When he'd lifted his lips, he sighed, resting his forehead against hers. It will happen, though, won't it? Erin chuckled. Of course it will. We both want kids, and IVF doesn't sound like a viable financial choice. He smiled. I'm not even going there. Okay, do you have a time frame in mind? I have no idea. I want a little time to feel comfortable with you. We have 10 days or so before I go back to work. Let's make the most of them. He didn't like her answer, but he'd accept it. He had too much respect for her to argue about it. Sounds good. We can make the most of them by kissing a lot, right? Absolutely. Just be ready for me to slap your hands away if you get too frisky. Frisky? I've always liked that word. Me too. Erin felt her eyes trying to close. She hadn't thought she'd be able to sleep with a strange man so close, and face it, Al was strange, but she surprised herself. She was way too tired to stay awake another minute. Al watched her as she drifted off, her head still propped on her hand, a smile on his face. Maybe he hadn't gotten what he wanted that night, but for life. He thought she was just what he needed. That crazy purple-haired matchmaker knew what she was doing after all. Asterisk. They were up early the following morning to get ready for their flight to JFK Airport. I wish we had a little time to see New York City while we were there, Erin told him as she put her shoes on. I've never been, and I've always wanted to go. Al frowned. I didn't know. I'd have made it happen if I had. And this is why Dr. Lachele should have let us talk. Maybe, Erin answered vaguely. She wasn't certain she'd have married him if she'd met him first, and getting to know him told her that he was a decent guy. Maybe Dr. Lachele was right in doing things the way she did. Okay, I think we're ready. We have time for breakfast before heading to the airport. Their breakfast is supposed to be absolutely amazing. Then feed me. You don't want me getting hangry at the airport. He shook his head at her, grinning. I never knew a girl as tiny as you could eat so much. He was absolutely thrilled to see she didn't pick at her food, though. She shrugged. I'm active. I mean, I'm not a runner, but I'm a fidgeter. I never stop wiggling. I'm sure the way I eat will eventually catch up with me, but it hasn't yet. A couple of hours later, they sat together at their gate waiting for their flight. I'm so glad we're done with security. Are we really going to Switzerland? Erin was getting excited. It may not be her dream vacation, but it was somewhere she'd never been. We have a 2-hour layover at JFK, which won't be enough time to leave the airport. We can buy souvenirs though, if that's something you like to do. Erin grinned. I love souvenir shopping. The cheesier the better. And I don't care at all who laughs at me. Do people laugh at you for that? Elle made a face. Why are people so mean to each other? No idea. I went on a vacation with a friend once, and she was, well, she's not my friend anymore. She kept me from buying the silly souvenirs, and then when I got up and went shopping before she woke up, she insisted on digging through my bags and made fun of everything. At one point, she pulled something out and wrinkled her nose and asked who the object was for. I smiled and told her it was for me, plucked it from her hand, and put it back in the bag. She never asked again, but I never gave her the chance. She sounds rude. Erin nodded emphatically. It's weird, because I thought we were good friends until that trip. She made fun of everything I wore and everything I did. After that, I had no time for her. Some people have to make themselves feel better by criticizing everyone around them. I won't make fun of anything you buy. I promise. Elle thought about that for a minute. Okay, that may not be true. Like if you buy a plastic unicorn that poops rainbow candies, I'd laugh at that. You have my permission to laugh if I ever buy anything so utterly disgusting. He chuckled. All right. I'll take you up on that. Erin loved to people watch in airports. It was truly the most fascinating place on earth. She nudged Elle with her elbow. Do you think that guy over there is on his way to meet a girl? Look at him, he's holding a rose, and he keeps moving it from one hand to the other. And he's got that slightly panicked look in his eye that men get before a blind date. He raised an eyebrow at her. Exactly how many blind dates have you been on? She shrugged. Only a couple, but you never forget that look. She nodded to someone else, a young woman sitting alone who had a box of chocolate cookies beside her and a Kindle in her hands. She's reading a romance, Erin told Elle. How do you know? You only eat chocolate if you're reading romance. If you're reading mystery, you eat chips. If you're reading horror, you don't eat, because ew. Elle shook his head at her. You have some very interesting ideas about life, don't you? She shrugged. Doesn't everyone? I guess. Maybe most just aren't as vocal about it as you are. I believe in calling a spade a spade. If a person is insane, I'm going to come right out and say it. There are crazy people out there. Okay. I'm not arguing with you. That's because you're a little afraid of me, aren't you? He wanted to laugh. How could anyone be afraid of his tiny little cute-as-a-button wife? Isn't every man a little afraid of his wife? Only if he's smart. Erin leaned over him to get a better view of the monitor to see if their flight had been delayed, getting twitchier by the minute. We still have 30 minutes before we board. I'm going to go find some chocolate. He frowned. I think they might have my fudge at the candy store a couple of gates from here. You think? He shrugged. They tell me they run out a lot. We sent them a delivery a couple of days ago, but it's Christmas, so you never know if they'll still have some. I'm going to see. She jumped up, grabbing her purse. Are you coming or staying here by yourself? If I stay alone, will people stare at me and say my wife left me before our honeymoon, and now have to go on it all alone? Probably. And then they'll say they're shocked you found anyone willing to marry you, and you must be really rich or something. That's just mean, Erin. She shrugged. I never claimed that I was always nice, did I? I don't know what you told Dr. Lachele. Not that. I promise you. She put her hands on her hips and glared down at him. Are you coming or not? I shouldn't, but I will. He got up and took her hand, smiling down at her. You're starting to grow on me. Like a fungus? He blinked a couple of times. Where did that come from? Well, you said I was starting to grow on you. What else could you possibly mean? Are you always going to be this difficult? It's my job. It's a tough one, but I try to keep everyone around me humble and aware. Don't you think that's good of me? Sure, he pointed to the candy store, and they went in together. Do you have any Frank's fudge? Erin asked the cashier after a cursory glance around the store. We're down to our last bit, the cashier responded. We can't keep this stuff in the store. It's the best there is. Have you tried it yet? Yes, I love it. What flavors do you have? We have some orange, some peanut butter, and some caramel twist. Caramel twist, please. Do you have any with sea salt? The cashier frowned. I don't believe Frank's fudge makes that, but it sounds good, doesn't it? It sounds delicious. Someone should complain to Frank. Erin said, her face filled with disappointment. Oh, the man's name isn't really Frank. He's Al Frank. You have to admit, Frank's fudge sounds a whole lot better than Al's fudge. Erin nodded. It sure does. The cashier gave her a small sack with her fudge wrapped up in it. Can I get anything else for you? Erin shook her head, noting the girl's name on her name tag. I'd love a bottle of water, Sophia. Al, do you want anything? He shook his head. Not now. I'll just take a pinch of your fudge later. You will not. This is Frank's fudge. Do you have any idea how much I love this stuff? More than your husband of one day? Erin laughed. Not even a contest. Chapter 5. During the 7-hour flight from New York to Geneva, Erin entertained herself with a book by Jolene Gold. She'd never been a huge romance reader, but her sister had sold Jolene and her husband a house in Culpeper, Wyoming, so she had to give her a try. She also watched a couple of movies on her iPad and eventually fell asleep. Her head drifted onto Al's shoulder as soon as she nodded off, and he smiled, pleased that she trusted him completely in her sleep. It was a good foreshadowing of the future, he hoped. He watched her sleep for a few minutes before he pulled his pillow from the back of the seat in front of him, tucked it behind his head, and fell asleep himself. There were worse ways to travel than snuggling with his beautiful new wife, and they would arrive early in the morning on Monday, so they would be losing a night of sleep unless they took advantage of the time on the plane. They were groggy when the plane landed, but they dutifully got out of their seats, gathering all the things they'd strewn around them. An hour and a half later, they were in their rental car and headed up into the mountains. Erin was tired and a little cranky, but she was fascinated by the scenery. She was used to mountains, having lived in Wyoming her entire life, but the mountains of Switzerland were like nothing she'd ever seen. Do you cook? He asked as they got to the little village closest to the cabin where they'd stay. She shrugged. I cook for myself a lot. I'm not great, but I haven't starved, so I must not be terrible. I figured we'll eat breakfast and dinner in the chalet and have lunch out. I have activities planned for most days while we're here. Activities? She asked. He'd mentioned some sightseeing adventures, but she wanted more details. Yeah. I figured while we were here it might be fun to do some sightseeing. He pulled into the parking lot of a store with a giant orange M on the sign. I've been told this is the place to grocery shop here. Erin shrugged. Are you going to share the cooking? Of course I am. I wouldn't ask you to do more than 90% of the cooking on our honeymoon. Funny. You think you're so funny. He smiled, reaching for her hand. Of course we'll share the work. Let's go figure out what we need. Once they were inside, they were both surprised by how familiar the supermarket was. Many of the items being sold were different, but the basic layout was the same as back home. What do you have planned for the week? She asked. That's a surprise. Al winked at her, and she shook her head. When they reached the display of chocolate, she went a little crazy. Switzerland is supposed to have the best chocolate in the whole wide world. I'm beginning to think that Dr. Lachele chose you for me because of your love of chocolate. Erin laughed, linking her arm through his. She's a smart woman, that Dr. Lachele. She is at that. Al shook his head as he watched his new wife choose multiple candy bars, all different variations of chocolate and caramel. How long do you think we'll be here? Oh, this is only a couple days' supply. Do you want some? She put several bags and bars into the grocery cart. He sighed. Yeah, I need a couple as well. He was very interested in tasting the difference between Switzerland's chocolate and US chocolate. Improving his product was always on his mind. An hour later, she was unpacking groceries into the refrigerator in the small kitchen. She hadn't taken the time to explore yet, but what she had seen was beautiful. Someone had put up a Christmas tree in the living room, and it was nice to have it there. She'd thought she'd have to do without a tree this Christmas. Al carried the last bag inside, leaning against the counter to watch her put things away. What do you think of this place? Did I do good? I love what I've seen of it, but I've barely looked around. I've been concentrating on getting everything put away. Erin took the bag he'd just brought in and found places for everything in it. There. Done. I'm hungry. She sighed. I'll make breakfast, but supper's on you. Opening the fridge again, she took out the ingredients for scrambled eggs and bacon. If he wanted something else, he could fix it himself. While she cooked, he wandered through the chalet, looking in every closet. When he got back to the kitchen, he grinned at her. Wait until you see the bedroom. It's absolutely amazing. Are you just trying to lure me there? I thought you wanted breakfast. He laughed. Not trying to lure you until after you finish cooking, but then yes, I'd love to take you in there and do what newlyweds do best. She shook her head. You said we'd wait. Al sighed. I did wait. We've been married he looked at the clock. I don't even want to think about the time difference. We've been married a day and a half or so. Erin smiled. I'm a little confused about the time difference myself. Do we get free Wi-Fi here? I should message my mom and tell her you didn't murder me in my sleep. We do have free Wi-Fi. Aren't you glad you brought your tablet? She shrugged. I guess so. I'm going to try not to focus on electronics much while we're here. This is our time to get to know each other before we have to head back to the real world. Are you already missing the real world? Not at all. It's nice to get away, and the view is absolutely amazing. From the dining room, she could see mountains and more mountains. She was thankful not to have to see a lot of people or anything but the beauty of the area they were in. After breakfast, she cleared the table. I made a simple breakfast, so there weren't a lot of dishes. I'm going to do the dishes myself, and then you can do the supper dishes. In her experience, when a man cooked, he messed up every dish in the kitchen and then expected someone to clean up after him. She was going to make it clear that wasn't happening in their marriage from the get-go. He shrugged. I can handle that. There's a dishwasher. She nodded, getting to work. There is. Should be easy to keep clean if we both work at it. She realized he was leaning on the counter watching her do the dishes.